Hello guys, David Vose here. Boy, and boy, oh boy, is it a beautiful day. Sun shining. Always starts off sunny here. Few scattered clouds, and then somewhere around noon, 1, 2 o'clock, it starts raining. It's been so beautiful. Well, hope you're having a wonderful day. Friends, I want to read you something here. This is the old AI, the AI overview. I looked up the word ecclesiastes just to show everybody what this word means, and we're going to follow this rabbit hole, and it's going to blow your mind. But the name Ecclesiastes, you've probably heard that word. It's in your Bible. You've got Ecclesiasticus and Ecclesiastes and different, we got books of the Bible that we see this word, but it seems so unrelated. Like, well, it's a book about Ecclesiastes. What does that mean? Well, it originates from the Greek meaning one who convokes an assembly or a preacher. You see, with these Greek words, a word can mean a preacher or an assembly because it depends on the tense, the syntax, and all this of the word to know whether you're talking about the guy who's preaching, who's convening the assembly, might be considered the one who is convening it is the preacher. Maybe that's why they say it's a preacher, but it really has to do, depending on the syntax, whatever, it's some kind of an assembly. But now Christianity has been saying for years, and I remember as a Jehovah's Witness, they were really big on saying, well, now there is no such thing as church, and we don't use that word. And then I've heard other people say, well, there is no such thing as a church building. We don't assemble to a building, but we are the assembly. We're the congregation. So they turned it into the word assembly or congregation and said that's what it means. It don't mean a church building. So that was the Witness Adventist Protestant kind of view. However, it doesn't mean assembly, because in English today, the word assembly just means people gathering anywhere. We assembled out at the ranch, right? We assembled in the building. We had an assembly. Jehovah's Witnesses used to have assemblies, and that wasn't their ordinary weekly congregations, but it was the greater congregation where we all met. Could be an international assembly. Sometimes later on they start calling them conventions. Again, convening or convoke an assembly. So a convention, and sometimes it's translated that convention in the days of the Old Testament, where they would convene this great assembly, or the gathering is another word, of Israel. However, that's not what this word means. This is one who convokes an assembly, and it's not all the people, but it is the authority. It's the grand senate. You see, the word assembly in this sense, the ecclesia, didn't refer to all the people of the Greek world. It meant their senate, or their ecclesia that reigned over them. And of course, this is probably why, if anybody cared to translate the Bible correctly, Jesus would look at Peter and say, you are Peter, and upon this Petros, I will build my church. What is the word church? Ecclesia. In other words, you're going to lead this assembly or this ecclesia. You're the boss. Interesting, because Peter, in Latin, you've got Jupiter, the Jupater, Dia, Pater, Dia is deity. So some say the Godfather, because Pater means father. But yet when they say Peter, they say, well, it doesn't mean father, it means little rock. Maybe it does, because in Matthew it says, you are Cephas. And then it says translated Peter. Why is it translated Peter? Because Peter is Greek. So when they put parenthesis, translated Peter, why would they say that? We're English. Why do we care what it means in Greek? Because the people that were standing there spoke Greek, and they needed it to be translated for them. The early church was Greek, so they translated it. However, his name was Aramaic, Cephas. Now, why would Peter's name be Aramaic? You are Cephas, some Aramaic word. Okay, why didn't you just say you are Peter, or Petros or something? Why not use a Greek word if he's Greek, right? If all the Christians are Greek, why is it? And some people say, oh, because the Bible was originally written in Hebrew, right? No, that's Aramaic. Well, who spoke Aramaic? The Syrians up in Persia and that area. The Greeks were the Egypt. They spoke more of a Greek language in Rome, and maybe Greece, this area, and even down when they took over Egypt, there was this Greek Hellenization going on all over the place. And so Greek was the major common language for 300 years till Christ. Before Greek was the common language, it was Persian or Aramaic. So remember, Israel was taken into captivity first from the Assyrians, and they were up in this northern area. There was all these dispersed ones. And so for 200 years after they were taken captivity, they had to learn the official world language because Persia ran the world. And everyone for 200 years spoke Aramaic. So why would Peter be still using an Aramaic word? Well, perhaps he came from that area. Remember, they were all from Galilee. Nobody tells you what any of these words mean. Galilee means, Gilgal in Hebrew means a wheel, a Gilgal. So it's a wheel, a round circle, and with the syntax where you say Galilee, it would be the circuit or the arc of a great wheel around a hub. When they put the 12 stones together that they brought up out of the Jordan River, they made Gilgal, or the wheel. And this has to do with reincarnation. We can go through all the esoteric meanings, but it seems that when Jesus was married in Cana, which is I'm telling you guys, this is a reference to Canaanites, right? The syntax is just moved depending on whatever language it comes down to. And so now we've got this word Cana. Always assuming we're talking about Jews and it's all got to be Hebrew, whatever. No, these were living up in the circuit of the nations. It's literally the phrase, the circuit or the Galilee of the nations. The Galilee of the nations is in the Bible several times. And so this is how we know what it refers to, this circuit. The circuit is the outer extremity or sphere of influence of a hub or a city. And so the central hub, the central location of all land masses in the world, right? The central geographical location of all land masses is Heliopolis, Cairo, Egypt. And so that's the hub. And there's a cave underneath, Machpelah, which means a vortice, a cave down deep in this swirling vortice that creates this wheel. And the wheel or the circuit was the circuit of the nations because the 10 tribes were scattered like seed and planted into all the world. And the promise to Joseph was that you will be a branch that will be fruitful by a well. In other words, it has a water source. And it will grow and be fruitful and go over the wall or a barrier and go unto the extremity of the earth. Oh, the circuit of Galilee. And your blessing, Joseph, will become a multitude of nations. So who are the nations? 72 souls came out of the loins of Jacob and came up a mixed multitude with Joseph at the head. The nations are not pagans or whatever word, heathens, or this is all made up by an apostate Catholic organization, Protestants. to lure you off. As Christians, we're pagans because the gospel was sent to the pagans or the nations. And we're going to have the blessing greater than the other blessing because we're Joseph, who was chief among his brethren, who had a dream that all the 11 stalks of grain bowed down to his stalk. He will be to whom is the stone of Israel. Well, who is the stone? Well, the one that the brethren rejected. And Judas had the idea to sell him to the Egyptians for money. So they sold him and they rejected the stone. And that's Jesus. So King David was the son of Jesse, an Ephraimite from the city of Ephratah, which is also called Bethlehem. And that's the city of Miriam or Mary. And that's the high priesthood, which spawned the Zadokite priesthood, the Nazarenes, like Deborah, who is the teacher of the mother of Israel, and taught Samuel and Samson and Gideon and these individuals, like perhaps even King David. And these were Nazarites, so the book of Psalms says that David had the Melchizedek priesthood. Zadok, Meli, King Zadok, or the righteous king that the Dead Sea Scrolls are talking about. Teacher of righteousness, which James was James the righteous, James the just. So he was the Zadokite priest. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it talks about the wicked priest. And so many people, because they don't like Paul, because they don't like grace, they want to go back to the law, like a dog to its vomit, they want to say that maybe Paul was the wicked priest, as if they, it's like they're just grasping for straws. They have no clue about everything that we're going to say today. They have no clue what any of this really means. They're just making it up. It's been lost. So, because they don't understand what the righteous teacher means, and you must understand all the connections. Teacher is also one way that they claim you can translate Lord, Master. Wait a minute. Is your master your teacher primarily? Is that what it is? The sole operandus is teacher, or is master also mean your owner? Well, this gets very confusing. It seems that they're just putting words together, hodgy-podgy, witchy, so that it'll get more and more confusing. This is the modus operandus of Yahweh, who runs the world, the deity of this world. He's the one who made Babel, the gate of El, into Babylon, confusion. And so we're all lost in confusion in Babylon, and they do not understand each other's languages. So we don't know what the word ecclesia means. We'll just manipulate the public and say it just means a gathering. Therefore, it must mean a church building. It's got to be some corporate organization called the church, right? And we don't know that the ecclesia had 72 members, and Jesus chose 12 and 72 also. So we wouldn't put that together. We don't, for the life of us, know where these individuals met. If there were 72 elders, 12 apostles, 72 elders that met in a ecclesia with James the Zadokite priest reigning over it, and Peter, the father, the sky father, the godfather, Jupiter, and some kind of a council or pillars that are Peter, James, and John, and all of this is going on like some kind of an ecclesiastical council. But for the life of these individuals, they can't figure it out. Makes no sense the way they want to tell you the story. Because if it was in Jerusalem, where Peter and James and John were holding this ecclesia, where did they meet? Well, they just say, well, we don't know. But somewhere the church had a meeting place. The church, right? Again, we're just using vague words. Where would they meet? Wouldn't the ecclesia that starts with 12 and has 72 elders, wouldn't they, a divine body, like a Sanhedrin, that's what a Sanhedrin is. They have 72. So It's absolutely, they just don't tell you, it's absolutely certain that Jesus chose a Sanhedrin, which is a ruling body of elders. If they were just meeting in someone's basement, that would be interesting. They would have no authority because, you see, to have divine authority, everyone must receive and accept it. It's a body that rules. If it doesn't rule, then it has no authority. I'll tell you, and we know beyond a shadow of a doubt where this body met. Josephus speaks of this body. It met in Egypt. There was more than one temple. There was many, even in the place names in Palestine that they, long after the events ever happened, where they went back and one group of Judeans that came down from the days of Maccabees, who didn't have the Zadokite priesthood, which is why the Essenes didn't follow them, because they only followed the Zadokite priesthood. And we absolutely know at that time in history where the Zadokite priesthood met, which is exactly where Jesus would have chose this Sanhedrin, because he was the one who took over for John the baptizer. And we know beyond a doubt that the city of John, the city of On, is the only place in the world that has an ecclesia that reigned, that had the Zadokite priesthood. It's not something that we don't know. It would be something that every scholar would have access to. Josephus talks about the Zadokite priesthood. They went to Leontopolis, which is on couple of 100 feet from the site where Heliopolis used to be, and they built a temple called the New Jerusalem, and they set up an ecclesia. Now, at the same time that this was going on, other Jewish people from the diaspora were building the temple in the Elephantine part of Egypt, the southern part of Egypt. They were building more than one temple. Why? Are they stupid? No, because in Egypt they had more than one, and so the place names up there in Palestine has Bethel, it has Bethlehem, it has, which had been the city where the priests were born, King David, Jesus, Samson, Samuel, and Jerusalem would be another city. There's just so much subterfuge. The Bible says they were on the road to Emmaus, and then their eyes were open when they broke bread. What were they doing? Breaking bread on the road. Well, it's figurative, slightly, but it's factual. The road to Emmaus, look it up, means the road to Heliopolis. This is the skull. Now, if you look at a picture of Egypt, you see the Nile River, which represents the spine, and the place called Goshen, which starts at the place we can pinpoint as the Great Pyramid, Cairo. That everything north of that is this land of Goshen that has all these rivers going in to the Mediterranean, like little ventricles in your brain. And the place where the Great Pyramid is literally in the exact spot where the pineal gland would be. And this area was called the skull. Now, it's not called a head, it's called a skull because it's a decapitated head. And therefore, when this capital, the decapitate, or the head, which was Goshen, which is where Abraham and his descendants ruled and reigned and lived for 500 years until the Exodus, where the temples are monuments to the patriarchs, and before the flood to Enoch, the pillar of Enoch, which Isaiah 19:19 clearly tells us is a temple unto the Lord. The only place in the Bible that pinpoints exactly where the temple of the Lord really was. Isaiah 19:19, in the midst and at the border thereof of Egypt. There is northern Egypt, southern Egypt, the midst and the border between the northern and the southern is the midst. And that is precisely the hub of the ecclesiastical wheel of rule. So look at this. Remember I told you that The lineal descendant of this royal lineage from Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ were the Capetian lineage that goes down to the Valois, which the L's became silent when they went further north, and it became Vose. And when it went to England, they spelled it Vose instead of Vose, Vause, V-A-U-S. And when they came to Boston, the Huguenots, or people from France that fled to England and then went to Boston and landed there, spelled their name V-O-S-E. But this is one of the main lines. Another line is the Clare, and St. Clare discovered America in Nova Scotia. And their leader of the Templar organization was Clare de Vaux. So it would be the line of the Vaux and de Clare. The individual before George Washington, who was the leader of the Continental Congress, his name was Clare, a descendant of St. Clare, who discovered America. And so he was a direct lineal descent back to Mary Magdalene and the Capetian line, which went down to the St. Clare. Now, this Capetian line, why are they called Capetian? Well, these are titles, just as Valois, or the Valley, or the Valley people, or the Pierre Waldo, in the romance novels of King Arthur, is called Percival. Val is also like valley, the Vale. So it's the people of the valley, and the Albigensians were the people of the Alps. So these words are titles or descriptions. So the Capetian line, what does it mean? Well, certainly sounds like it could come from the word head, right? The capital, and decapitation comes from the taking away of the head. So I asked AI if they could see that, and they said that the Capetian line is named after Hugh Capet, the founder of the dynasty, and the meaning of the nickname Capet is uncertain. They don't know, but they make stuff up and they say it's certain, but they don't really have any reason to say it other than somebody else said it. But I'm going to give you the truth. Though it is often linked to the Latin word caput, head, suggesting chief or head, it's unlikely to derive from decapitation, as that term refers to the removal of a head. See, they're not understanding because it's a stupid computer, so they can't figure out what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say that it comes from the decapitation, but it certainly does come from the word cap, or the cap of the hat. The hat is the cap, the top part of your head, the cap. And therefore, it refers to the descendants or the royal lineage of Heliopolis, which is the place of Golgotha, the skull, or Calvary, which is another language saying the same thing. And all capitals around the world, including America and everywhere else in the world, has capitals. Even the counties have capitals with the little, bin and the baptismal font. They're all temples because they're all replicas of the government of Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ. And we're going to find out that that government rules the world today. It has become apostate and its principles are hanging by a thread, but it is the kingdom of Christ that his stewards are given the talents to manage. But many of them begin to say, our master's delaying his coming, and they begin to go and eat with the confirmed drunkards and the gluttons, which is the old covenant, and they begin to beat their fellow servants, as we many times explained in the context of that parable. So the Capetian line is the line of the royal blood from Egypt. If you'll go back into the Irish history, you will find that the Irish kings get their lineage from this same line back to Mary Magdalene, as well as a woman who is called Titi, was an Egyptian priest. So the royal lineage of Ireland, which is the royal lineage of the Huguenots and the French dispersion, the Waldensian persecution, they go back to Mary Magdalene, and she goes back to the city of Heliopolis. This is the Capetian line. This is the royal blood of the capital legislative body. The circuit of this influence, which is the nations, where Joseph was prophesied to go and become a multitude of nations. The hub is where they reigned at the time that Jesus was on the earth. The central, remember there's many temples, but the temple up in Palestine is called Herod's temple, meaning the Idumean, Esau. So if today Jewish people want to follow that temple, they're following the man that they claim their deity hates. Now, do you think there could be some hanky-panky going on there? Do you think you, after hundreds and hundreds of years, nay, thousands, would follow a man that your ancestors said we hated? Perhaps they did a little tricky on you, and now you're not even worshiping in the true temple. Well, guess what? You're right. The Jews were taken to Babylon. They were captive. 70 years later, they were let free. They let go. Some of them went and became bondage to Esau in the land that we call Palestine. Jesus went there and said, "Ye are children of hell, a spawn of vipers." You know, a branch, yes, a branch of the royal priesthood, but even the Antichrist has royal roots, but he is a true priest of the lineage down through King David, but he's apostate. That's why they call him the wicked priest. And so there was the Levitical priesthood, which was the apostate appendage that followed the deity who fell from heaven on the mountain, who says, "This is my mountain," and he took it over by force, and he took the woman and divorced her, and she went into the wilderness. The woman is what? The one who gives birth to the seed, to Christ. Here comes Christ from Cana, Galilee, north. Peter's got this Aramaic name, which has got to be up in Persia, Syria area where they were. And he's still, by tradition, carrying these names that came down from the Aramaic. But they definitely were Greeks, because it's translated right in your Bible, which means Peter. So the people that were listening there in the days of Christ were Greeks. But his disciples, many of them had Aramaic names because they were descendants from the diaspora. They didn't live in Jerusalem. Now, the temples up at Syria were branches of the original grand temple at Heliopolis. So down in Luxor, just north of there, there's a place called Dendera, and there is a temple called the Temple of Hathor. Hathor is the way they said it then. Greeks would come along and change everything. They would see the city of Ra or the city of John on, and they would translate it Elios, right? But again, it has roots back to El, so it's the city of El, which is another word for sun too, because we have the word sun, which is the S and the An. An is also a word for the highest thing, which could be the sun. And so you put the S and the An, and you got sun. But then you've got El, right? Which also could be Ol. And if you put the S on that, now you've got Sol. Sun and Sol have that in common. They refer to the sun, but one of them is S-An, and one of them is S-Ol. But what I'm saying is that El is also a term for the sun. So the sun then is in the center and shines out its rays, and it makes a circuit. The sun makes a circuit around the world. And it's like a chariot that goes forth from one house to the other and makes a circuit. But let's go back here to what we were looking at. The name Ecclesiastes originates from the Greek meaning one who convokes an assembly or preacher. It's a translation of the Hebrew name Koheleth, also meaning one who addresses an assembly, or a gatherer, one who convenes the assembly, the gatherer. But the root of that word is the assembly itself. But this is helping you understand that it's not just any assembly. It's an assembly that will be gathered by someone and convened and reigned over as a body or a legislative body. So the book traditionally attributed to Solomon is structured as a collection of reflections on his life, meaning, and purpose. Now, I only looked that word up because it's not the word we want. But what we want to know is, what does the word church mean? And the word church in Greek is ecclesia. I only am showing you this Ecclesiastes so that we can find the truth about what the word means. Because if I ask AI what ecclesia means, they're just going to say it's something like a church or a body of believers gathering. But I wanted you to see that it's not just a gathering. They're lying. It is a legislative body. It is the authority, the ruling Senate or Sanhedrin. And that is a fact. And if that's true, then something far greater is going on here in the New Testament. If I were to ask AI, where did this body of 72, these elders, meet in Jerusalem, what would they say? Since there is no historical indication that there was such a Sanhedrin, Christian Sanhedrin, before the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So where were they? Well, it would be pretty obvious, but they don't want you to know that the Sanhedrin, the 72, that were not Judean, but followed the other priesthood, the Zadokite, and James the Just, or James the Righteous, or that word Zadokite, was not in Jerusalem, but was reigning, as history tells us, as Josephus and the other historians tell us, at the temple at Leontopolis, right on the site of Heliopolis, where they built the particular new Sanhedrin, or legislative body that was putting forth the decrees of Christ. And so what happened to the Sanhedrin in Heliopolis after Christ died in 70 AD, when they came in and destroyed it? Well, the Apocrypha tells us that the Romans took Mary and Lazarus and Martha and the 72 and put them on a boat, and they sailed, and they arrived at Marseilles, France. Marseilles, France was the landing place of the 72. Then, just a few miles from there, there was a place called Montpellier. Montpellier is Mount Pelier. And notice that AI will always tell you what they want you to believe, and they never give you any options. And they kind of make you think that it's just established. You have to accept it. So what does Montpellier mean? They say that Montpellier is where the Woad Mountain or the Woad Hill interpretation is generally accepted for the origin of Montpellier, from the French Montpellier, France. There are other perspectives and possibilities to consider. So they just normally would tell you it's Woad Mountain. There's some kind of plant that grows that's a woad plant. But how woad somehow is supposed to be translated to pilear, they don't really even tell you. That's just somebody's idea. So then one idea is naked hill or bald hill. Okay. One less common theory suggests that the name could have derived from the Latin phrase meaning naked hill, or bald hill, potentially referring to a prominent geographical feature in the region. With association with healthy climate, the medieval French city of Montpellier was known for its medical school and healthy climate. Therefore, the name may have been chosen to evoke an ideal spot. Well, healthy mountain air. Okay, this is beautiful ideas, but they don't even give you any reason why it would be like that. Then you've got the connection to the pilgrims. In some contexts, Montpellier may have been associated with pilgrims, travelers. Travelers? Aren't the people who came to America called pilgrims? Why were they called pilgrims? Because they came from France. They were the Huguenots. They were driven out by the Catholics because they were the first Protestants. And so pilgrims means travelers, right? Okay, that sounds a little bit more promising. So the word pellegrino in Italian means pilgrim. So perhaps the word Montpellier is the mountain of the pilgrims. What pilgrims? Well, a remnant or a group of individuals that flees and makes a pilgrimage or a place to some other place. We don't know what the word Montpellier is definitively according to AI, but it is a very important place. As you know, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington with Mount Vernon, and Madison with Monticello, right? They were very conscious of their French roots back to Mary Magdalene and the liberty cap that she wore. And their entire government before the Constitution came about was the French government that was historically there at Montpellier, at the place where Mary landed with the 72. It's that 72 that Jesus chose, that he told Peter he would be the godfather of, or should we say the sky father, or the pater. And it is that council or body or legislative body that he said the gates of hell would not prevail against. If the gates of hell is not going to prevail against it, and it was there in Heliopolis, and they destroyed Heliopolis in 70, just like they did the one up there at Palestine called Herod's Temple, then where did it go? Well, from there it went, as we know in history, on the boat with Mary Magdalene and Lazarus, or the Osiris. La is the definitive article, because the word for deity is the, because there is nothing but. It's the one, the all. So the word El and all is related. The All-Father. And the All-Father reigns over a body or an ecclesiastical legislative body. It was at Heliopolis, we know, because it's called the Zadokite priesthood. And we know that came down from Miriam, or Mary, who had the high priesthood. Her initiation as high priestess is right there in your Bible. And Moses and Aaron anointed her as high priest. And she had the city of Bethlehem, where all the Zadokite priests came. And David, King David, who was a Melchizedek priest, as it says in Psalms, and Jesus, who was a Melchizedek priest, as it says in the book of Hebrews, and James, whose name was literally Zadokite, or the great teacher, or the priest, which is also supposed to be Jacob, not James. I don't know why they say James. They're trying to throw you off. His name was never James, it's Jacob, and he is the Zadokite priest. Now, that would mean that he's from this Bethlehem, and we showed before that Bethlehem, where Mary was, several Marys, not only the Mary, Miriam, same word, Moses' sister, but go on down to the days of the birth of Jesus, and we've got another Mary as a priestess who was, from the time that she was born, tradition says, a priest, a holy virgin in some priesthood. There are no holy virgins in the priesthood at Jerusalem. There are none. There just aren't. But there was a holy priesthood of holy virgins, that the central hub location was at Heliopolis, and then that particular pagan nation, Joseph, who with Asenath reigned over Heliopolis, which is Jerusalem. That religion and those temples, which were then called the House of El, Bethel, was taken to Greece and all over the world. And these are the 10 tribes that need to be restored. When they're restored, they'll bring their sticks wrapped in parchment, and they'll be joined as one in thine hand with Judah's stick, or the Bible. So today we have the Bible, and we have all the other scriptures, Buddhist, Taoist, Shintoist, Zoroaster, all of it, which is the stick of Joseph, who will become a multitude at the extremities of the earth, in the circuit of Galilee, or the circuit of the nations, that Jesus, Peter, and all of these came from, because they were officiating in the same manner that they had originally officiated there at Heliopolis, and then were driven out and sent to a place called Marseilles. Now, the reason why we know beyond a doubt that was the government of Jesus there at Marseilles, France, that became the Knights of St. John, which is a priesthood. Knights are priests. Jesus knighted John and said, take care of Mary and the Holy Grail and the Holy Textus Receptus. And that's what their job was. And so these individuals, called the people of the valley and the people of the mountains, or the Alps, they lived along the Rhone River, which goes from Marseille all the way up to Paris. And so the Catholic Church didn't like them and drove them out. These became what we have, the Templars, or the esoteric wisdom that was infiltrated by the Illuminati around the early part of the last century. And now all of this ancient knowledge has been infiltrated and covered up so that you don't know any of this. But that body of legislative people, Huguenots, George Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Adams, all of them, believed and came from the school of the Masonic, what they call it today, may not be the appropriate word, because it was never called Masonic, but it was originally the Knights, or the Priesthood of St. John and Mary Magdalene. And it was taken here to America and established, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And that's a fact, Jack. If you just look it up, you will find that the early government style, legislative body, the whole thing, the principles, was based on freedom and not law, grace and not the bondage of the Torah. And it was the same teachings of Mary Magdalene, who, if you go back and you look at the Septimania and the 7 cities of Mary Magdalene in France, the Languedoc, where the first translation of the Bible from Greek happened. The first translation into a common language, which was the language of the Languedoc, which is probably where we get the word language, because it's the original language from Jesus Christ. And that was the first translation. And this is why that priesthood, the Knights, as most people are completely unaware, was in France, not in Britain. So Avalon was in France. And the Knights that we're talking about, where King Arthur ruled, that's Arcturus in the north, like Polaris, that's ruling the body of the stars, the assembly, right? And he ruled over a round table, right? The 12 houses of the zodiac. And this comes down to us from Heliopolis, which is all the same, the city of Ra, the circuit, the round table. All of this is embedded in the language, but it's confused. So I asked AI, where did the 72 that Jesus chose, a body of elders or ecclesia, meet when James was leading in Acts chapter 15? And AI says, According to Acts chapter 15, the gathering led by James, the brother of Jesus, and the leader in the Jerusalem church. See, they just state that as if it's fact, that James was the leader in the Jerusalem church. The reason they say that without proof is because he's got to be a leader, and he seems to be in some kind of authority. He has a gavel. He makes a decision. Well, why is he making a decision for Peter, who's supposed to be the godfather? And who is James and who is Peter then? And where are they meeting? They don't know. They just make this stuff up. The truth is that there are different positions in this chief body. Remember, Peter was given the keys to the kingdom. That doesn't mean he's the king. The king allows one person to have the keys of the kingdom for legislative purposes. He is like the superintendent of the temple and has the keys to go in and out of the temple. And that's all it ever means. And we can prove that from verses in the Old Testament, that the term, the keys of the kingdom. The keys of the kingdom, the Bible says, belong to King David and always will. And of course, they were given to Jesus. And Jesus then was the literal king over it. And the king was the one who was the king of the sacraments, or the rex sacrorum. And he ruled not alone, but with his wife. No one knows this, that Mary Magdalene was high priest. She did the anointing, the burial ritual, which was a pharaonic ritual back to the Egyptian priesthood. However, she may or may not have been reigning at Heliopolis. I think the Virgin Mother was. But from history, it appears that Mary Magdalene was the daughter of Cleopatra and was given to a Persian king to be the wife, and ruled that part where they spoke Aramaic for some time. And of course, this is where this is tying in with what we were saying before. So the temple of Artemis is really just their way of saying the temple of Hathor. Again, it's the worship of the Divine Mother, because Yahweh threw her out and she went into the wilderness, right? So they're saying that this guy James was a leader in the Jerusalem church. Well, jargon, because it wasn't even in Jerusalem as you understand that word. It wasn't in Palestine, and we'll be able to see that. But it says, regarding the question of Gentile converts and the Mosaic law, involved a meeting in Jerusalem with the apostles and the elders. More specifically, Acts chapter 15 describes the Jerusalem council as a gathering that included figures like Paul, Peter, James, Barnabas, and church elders. Yeah, elders is a term, and they know it, that refers to the 72. It's not like Jehovah's Witnesses tell you get these little, backroom elders that you appoint out of nowhere by someone who has no authority, 3 in each congregation that hold the power over your life and can go in a secret dark room and without you even being able to face your accuser, or even most of the time even know what you did. They could just meet, decide that you're out, and you're gone. You're executed, right? Excommunicate. So that's not what elders were. They didn't appoint elders in all the congregations. They appointed the elders from the congregations in the cities. But the congregation that they were the elders over was the great congregation, or the Ecclesia. And there were 72, no less, no more. It was like the Senate. It was a specific number. And it was divinely inspired, because that body of 72 at Heliopolis and that met at Alexandria was the divinely instituted council of elders, and they translated the Bible. The only divinely inspired Bible is the Septuagint, which means the translation of the 72. And that 72 was not, I repeat, it was not at Herod's temple. It was not in Palestine. It was at Heliopolis. And Josephus, the historian, and Pliny, and Plutarch, and all of them will tell you this absolutely. So, It says, another source also indicates the presence of apostles and elders. As if they don't know that apostles and elders are a Sanhedrin. None of this, they act like they don't know, but they know that they can get away with saying these vague things because you don't know. So then he goes on and says, while the passage doesn't explicitly state the meeting location within Jerusalem, it was a central gathering of the early church's leadership to address crucial issues. Well, what authority did they have? And if we don't know where they were, perhaps you should just look at the history book and see that the Zadokite priesthood, which James the Zadokite is the Zadokite righteous teacher, who was beyond the river Jordan in the desert at Heliopolis, where there was a baptismal font right outside the obelisk of Cleopatra in the city there of Hathor. And the baptismal font and the temple in the background was the temple that had the Senate or the Sanhedrin that was divinely inspired. And they were Zadokite priests that the book of Ezekiel tells us is the only priesthood that our Heavenly Father will accept. That is why the Essenes, who were a group of priests up at Artemis, and another group of these Essenes was at, evidently, if the Dead Sea Scrolls are to be understood as legitimate, although it's a little odd that shepherd boy is running around the desert that day and just throws a little rock in this little hole, doesn't go over there and look, right? He's close enough to the cave to throw a rock, and he's little kids, we can't throw far, but instead of just going there and look, he throws a rock and it breaks. And then he goes and investigates, and there's these pots that lasted for 2,000 years with scrolls in them, proving, which had never been indicated before. All we ever had was Greek manuscripts of the Bible, no Hebrew. But all of a sudden now we got, Hebrew, right? Convenient. And they say, well, how come the pots were preserved all this time in the open air in a cave with the hole open to the air, What if it rained, or the moisture, or just they got old and cracked in the dry heat and crumbled? How did they survive 2,000 years? Oh, well, it says the bats pooped on them. That's what preserved them. Quite coincidental. However, I do believe that regardless of whether the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls was coincidental or not, I do think they were kind of fessing up to some things that they didn't want you to know. Like, for instance, that the Dead Sea Scroll individuals believed only in the Zadokite priesthood, and therefore the only authority they recognized was Heliopolis, because that's where the Zadokite priests were. Because John the Fourth, or On the Fourth, was the only, and even the Jewish people recognized, was the last of the Zadokite priests at Heliopolis in the time of the first century. And that is where James was. No question about it. Case closed, period. And if we know that, we know that the group of 72 that Jesus chose functioned as a body right in the book of Acts, chapter 15. It was a functioning, divinely sanctioned body of rulers, the elders that made the decisions, not your three little patron elders that you just, want to raise up through some mafia style Godfather Don. Oh, by the way, they call them the Don, right? The Godfather's called the Don. Isn't that interesting? Where does this word Don come from? Well, the Latin dona means the leader or the chief or the god or the ruler in every language. You go to the Irish and they've got all these dens or dons or donnas, and the biggest one is in the middle, and it's Mackanaght, the Don of Mackanaght. Mechanahe is my mother's maiden name, and her ancestry goes back to the rulers of Ireland, which arrived there as refugees being thrown out of France, just like the Huguenots in Britain. These were more or less earlier Huguenots that were in Scotland and Ireland that were fleeing persecution from Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and Lazarus and the 72, and they took with them the legislative body. It would be biblically, it's going to be a fight. The devil's going to be after the woman. She doesn't have the child that gives birth with a rod in his hand to rule the nations with an iron rod. That doesn't happen yet because she's still in the wilderness and the devil's after her, breathing down her neck with water out of his mouth to drown her. The earth came to the woman's help. How? Well, her children were dispersed and fled to America, and they set up that kingdom right here in the United States of America, and that is the kingdom of Jesus that will never fall, that will never be brought to ruin, for the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And that is why Joseph Smith the prophet said that the Constitution of the United States will be hanging by a thread, but it will not fail. And those who will prop up the Constitution will be those standing in the Rocky Mountains during the Great Tribulation, protected by the Lord, where he will prepare a table for them in the wilderness. And they will be a beacon on a hill and a light that will be shining to the entire world. Give us you're tired, you're hungry. Bring all the people. This is a land of love and peace and liberty and justice for all, friends. It is the kingdom of grace, the kingdom of Jesus, and it will stand for all eternity. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.